interesting. There's someone, there's an Australian living in Glasgow from Brisbane. That's exciting. Someone from Birmingham. Okay, right. So today's topic, we have covered service design a fair bit during these sessions. And this is one that I think has come up time and time again, is how do you avoid tokenistic co-creation? So lots of people in the third sector are doing amazing stuff with service design. Lots of people don't call it service design, and that is equally as fine. But really what we're thinking about today is how do we involve people in that process without it being a tokenistic process, and what does that look like, and what do we mean when we talk about that, and how can you avoid some of those pitfalls? So that's what we're going to cover today. So we've got Sarah Drummond, who's founder at Snook. We've got Mike Press, director at Open Change. Melanie Raymond, a special shout out to her because it is like, what time is it there?
It's 11 p.m. at night in Sydney.
Man, that's a big My brain doesn't function beyond about 5 o'clock, so I'm quite impressed there. That's amazing. So Melanie is a designer at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, and we've got Kirsty Jones Sinclair, who's senior service designer at the Scottish Government. So we've got a pretty amazing lineup for you today. So our first speaker, did we decide, Mike, are you going to go first? Did we decide that? Yeah, right, okay. So Mike's run to another event that he's run after this. So this is pretty amazing that Mike's taking time out of his diary to do this. So I'll hand over to you first of all, Mike.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks so much for inviting me this afternoon. Welcome to everyone. So there's 4 of us speaking. And when I look at my 3 colleagues, I'm thinking, wow, they're awesome. They've done some fantastic work and actually some brilliant, really inspiring projects. So when we were thinking about, how we kind of divvy up this subject and who concentrates on it, there's 4 of us. I'm very much the Ringo. Right, I'll be kind of grounding it in not really context, but a little bit of theory and stuff, because what these 3 colleagues of mine are bringing to it are some great, really inspiring stories. So I'm going to concentrate less on the stories, and I suppose why it matters. Why is it important to involve users in, to put users first and involve them in any kind of innovation process or design process or process of change. So where to start? Well, I used to be an academic, so I often start off there. And there was one recent study, in fact, by a bunch of Swedish academics, and they looked at 40 international studies of design projects that involved users. And really they were asking the question, well, why does it matter? What was gained by involving the users? What did all these studies conclude? And they concluded that there were 3 things. There were 3 benefits from involving people really from day one. First of all, it's about learning. Even a fairly low level of involvement helps us understand people's needs. In fact, less about their needs and more about their lives. So involving users brought out their diverse realities, their interests, their experiences, and it shifted people's perceptions from seeing users as a homogenous group of people with all the stereotypes and biases that involves, towards seeing them as a heterogeneous, socially active group of individuals who lead different lives and are looking for different problems to solve and so forth. So learning, that's the first advantage. Secondly is about design. Is coming up with solutions and ideas and alternatives. Working with leaders leads to better design outcomes. It leads to more ideas being generated, more prototypes being developed, and actually a process that helps us to evaluate, is something going to work or not? And the third advantage is a sense of participation. People valued being treated as an equal partner, and indeed as an expert. So with that, you've got, a heightened sense of ownership, of involvement, of empowerment. Now, what the Swedish researchers concluded is that those benefits are not automatic. They don't automatically come if you involve users. It depends on how users are involved. So having read that, I thought, well, I guess from our experiences in Open Change, some of the projects that we've done, and also knowing the kind of work that Melanie and Kirsty and Sarah have done, I think 3 issues are really critical here. First of all, how you involve people and what you ask them really matters. Are you asking them to be research subjects? Or are you asking them to be experts that you want to work with? Do we simply ask them what they want? Well, actually, most people don't necessarily know what they want, but what they do know, and they're experts in this, is what they've experienced and what doesn't work and how things could be better. So they're world experts in their own past experience and how those experiences made them feel. For example, we work with Dundee City Council. I'm trying to solve the problem of why they weren't recruiting more young people into the local authority. And the ones that they did, that they actually left quite quickly. So we got a room full of 50 people together, modern apprentices, department heads, and even the chief executive. And the young people shared their experiences of how, as 16-year-old school leavers, being subjected to a graduate level application and interview process was intimidating. And having the next youngest person in the office being in their 30s does make it a little bit tricky to fit in. So in one day, that room full of people came up with a whole range of policies and practices that totally changed how young people are recruited by that local authority. So that is the first issue, how you involve people and what you ask them. And second, the methods that you use are really important. All methods, all methodologies, all tools that we use are political. You know, they embody and express political values. Now, I know Sarah, along with myself, is a fan of Ivan Illich, and there's now a fairly old book, Tools for Conviviality. And what he calls convivial tools were those that encourage people really to think for themselves, be more socially engaged. So we want tools that are accessible, that are open, and play to people's lived experiences as a strength, rather than require specialist knowledge to use. And there's lots of examples of that. The final point I want to make is that it's about creative confidence. People, all people, I would argue, want a sense of agency in their lives. Given the choice, they want to be involved. They want to act creatively. They want to be asked. But only if they're trusted, only if they're respected, and only if they have the confidence to make a meaningful contribution. So it's way beyond methods and tools and processes. It's about guiding, it's about encouraging, it's about teaching, it's about supporting, it's about inspiring the people that we work with. And that's what we try and do in the Service Design Champions courses that we run for the Scottish Government. It's what we've done in GovJam and Global Service Jam, and I know my colleagues have been involved in those as well. I'm sure they've got other examples of how you build people's creative confidence. And all the events that we run, when we ask people for feedback, you know, a really common form of feedback is, I never thought I could think creatively. I never thought I could actually I could make a service. I could see what it looked like. And giving people that confidence, that sense of agency, the fact that they can build something and make a change happen is really important. And I suppose fundamentally, the reason that we do it is this. My partner in Open Change, Hazel White, says that co-design makes vulnerable people powerful and powerful people vulnerable. Involving users, involving them really as fully as we can, is not just an act of service improvement. It's a political act. And I would argue that's fundamentally why we do it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. That was amazing. What we're going to do, we're going to do a slightly different format this time because Mike needs to shoot away because he's got another event. Mela needs to go to bed. That's just what needs to happen after she's done this. So we're going to take questions for Mike just now. So does anyone have any questions for Mike? In fact, Tom's actually put a question in. Tom, do you want to unmute yourself and you can jump on and ask a question?
That was brilliant, Mike. Thank you. I'm just going to paraphrase what I put in the comments. In a recent Slack chat, I was talking to a person who was lamenting the current fad of everything having to be based on a user need, and that the dogma around user needs was detracting from professional knowledge. My question is, how would you challenge a person with this viewpoint?
This is a bit like Gardner's question time. You know, I've got a north-facing wall and a winter. Okay, so you've got a particularly difficult winter flowering clematis there. The whole thing about professional knowledge. and people seeing that professionalism being intruded on by people. And it is this question of actually seeing us as equal experts. That actually, yeah, we're you know, all of us here, we're experts at various things. We're experts in terms of context, of professional context, of generic solutions to problems, etc., of detail, of policy, of strategy. We're experts in that. Users are experts in lived experience. They're absolute experts in the things that work and the things that don't work, and they're bringing that understanding and those insights that come from that actually into an innovation, a change, a design process, call it what you want. And I think the thing that I'd say to Tom's challenging colleague is that, well, maybe, yeah, you could argue why Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon, companies like that, they involve users from day one because they know actually it leads to better outcomes. I hope that answers your question, Tom.
I'm taking it from the thumbs up. That's a good response. Okay. Beth, did you notice any other questions coming through on the chat there?
There's a few about the Illich book, which maybe can be answered kind of within the chat. I don't know if there's, Sarah's already put one response, but Paul was looking to see sort of how you apply it to modern context, but that may be one that can be kind of picked up as we go along.
Chat. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, great. Brilliant. Anyone want to jump on video chat? You can ask me a question. Laurie.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
One of the things that I've seen recently in a recovery and renewal plan is that it was going to be co-produced, but that was presented to a community planning partnership and said, here, give us some feedback on this. So it wasn't co-produced. I know that co-production and co-design are very much the buzzwords of the day. That's the way, that's the direction of travel, and everybody can see the value. What do you suggest in terms of being able to challenge in situations like that, where it's been badged as co-production or co-design, but actually it's not being done or delivered in that way, that there's no true engagement? What's your suggestions on how to challenge that?
I don't know. I think possibly my three colleagues here have got more experience to draw on. I'm just trying to think of an example. Well, I mean, just without naming names, an organization that does things in a particular way, and it's actually very ingrained. There's conventions about how you work, those practices that are deeply rooted in the organization need to be challenged. And I think it's a question actually of showing what works elsewhere. And we've done that in a few cases where we got into an organization, we said, well, this has worked there. And we're not saying that you copy it, but actually the lessons that we can draw from these experiences are, if you involve people from day one and you make it accessible and you respect them and you trust them to be part of a process, then it leads to these kind of outcomes. So how can we adapt and apply those kind of principles here? But again, maybe Melanie, Kirsty or Sarah have other examples of how to deal with that actually quite specific problem. And I'm sure actually quite a common one.
I think it might come out in the three presentations we're going to hear, but I think that can't be emphasized enough, because that for me is it's part of the reason why I kind of asked these speakers here today, because it's the thing that we see over and over again in the charity sector is you talk about service design and whatever words you use or language you use, people tell you, well, I do these things, and you dig a bit deeper and you ask them, well, what does that look like for you? And it's exactly what you just described, Laurie. It's like a decision has already been made. You're a bunch of people in a room who are going to ratify a decision that we made as a board or a senior management team, and you're there as a human rubber stamp. Or, I'm going to ask you some questions as a survey after your experience, and that's how I'm going to design a service. And it's not to say that these things don't have merit, but they're not necessarily robust service design tools. And I think that's really all we're talking about when we talk about this stuff. But I think, what you've described, I think is much, much more common than people think. And it's a very nice thing to put on a grant application as well, because you use a word like co-creation. Nobody who's a grants officer really digs particularly deep, because they go, well, it must be co-creation because they said it was co-creation. And then when you dig that bit deeper and you learn what it actually is, I would argue it's more harmful than it is productive. If you've made a decision, just go make the decision. Just do it to people. Don't pretend that they've ratified it or had some kind of say in it when they've not. So, right, I'm going to stop ranting. Did that help in terms of the question, Laurie? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Right, I'm going to hand over to Melanie just now because of time. So I'll hand over to you just now.
Okay. There we go. Can you see my screen? I'm sorry, Mike. I can't follow with the slides at 11 o'clock at night. So I apologise. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Melanie Raymond, one of the directors at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, and coming to you from the traditional lands of the Bidjigal people. And I've met these lovely panellists because I used to work at Bernardo's in the UK, so it's nice to see some familiar faces. Look, before we kick off, I wanted to just take 10 seconds, recognising that you're all working in really high stress environments at the moment in particular, and just to put 2 feet on the ground and feel that connection between you and the ground. And if you can look outside and see a tree, take a moment to look outside and just take one deep breath. Because I think at the moment it's easy to get distracted by the job at hand in terms of the thing I need answered, the thing I need to deliver, over the experience that you're actually going to create for others. And in particular, in bringing in the lived expertise into the service design process, or the design process, as you might call it, we need to really be conscious about that experience that we're creating for people. So I think for me, it's always about how do I need to turn up so that I can create a positive experience for others and leave good behind in the way that we bring users into that experience. And in doing that, it's about prioritizing those relationships for those authentic experiences. So really ensuring that every person has a caring and supportive experience, and one that really holds true that value of, you know, that reciprocal relationship. One thing I'm always really conscious about is this notion of sort of being extractive, you know, tell me your experiences, tell me your trauma. And so really being conscious about only leaving good behind. And I think, you know, picking up on what Mike was saying, I think there's a real moral imperative to ensuring that the support that we provide is designed with those who have the life experiences or have encountered the current conditions in which that support operates within. And so I wanted to bring you today 3 roles and 3 stories. So I wanted to introduce you to Lee, Justin and Peter, and they've been working with us for about 4 months, working alongside service partners, research and designers with us. And we've been working to find new ways forward in regards to a particular service around mental health for corrections clients. And really the problem that they were facing was that they weren't getting people eligible for the service to come through the door. Now, what I think is really exciting about this and in bringing in these men into this process is they were really able to sort of say to other people when they were researching, like, I get it, you know? And so there was that real unspoken, deeply reciprocal understanding. And they were able to break through barriers with our partner in regards to their organisation's ability to learn and listen and progress. But what's most exciting is that by doing this really authentically and in a really safe and supportive environment, those small wins in terms of redesigning the service and actually redesigning a couple of services along the way and an evaluation process has gone on to create big wins. And so these 3 men are now actually all employed by the community health organisation. They're all undertaking certificates in community services. One has finished their corrections order, and one of the young men here, Peter, who'd previously been disconnected from his particular culture here, has gone on to never having led an acknowledgement of country, to leading that at every one of our sessions, and is now leading their reconciliation action plan with that community health provider. So I think it's really important to think about, you know, that deep experience and working with them in terms of undertaking a rigorous approach to do this really safely, because all of these men were experiencing their own corrections orders and they were going out and meeting people on the street. So we talked about what do we want to understand and what do we want to learn? And they really led that sort of public role, and they drew on their intrinsic knowledge to research people. And you know, they were sort of asking people about what's happening, and even sort of undertaking sort of small disclosures in terms of understand where you're at. So I think that's it's a really exciting opportunity for those people and for us, and we're so gracious to be able to work with them and to see them progress after that process. The second is Diana. And now we had Diana and a number of other young people actually working as insights gatherers across the community, and they were working in this role about having intentional conversations across a really broad audience. And basically that role was about them working through their existing networks to reach out into community and to reach out to others with lived experience. And so we did this through inviting them through a job ad and through other networks, and they registered their interest, and we created you know, some sort of small barrier to entry in terms of registering their interest and to come along to a introduction session and to connect with people and understand what this role might entail. And after they were selected, they hit the streets with their buddies, and they were paired up, and they were surrounded by some really strong scaffolding support and pre and post check-ins before they went out to undertake their research. And what I think was really exciting was what we learnt about working with these amazing young people was that young people were really providing a critical role in the innovation process. They bring a real natural tenacity, raw emotion and courage and sense of urgency to be involved in the conversations. And they were really sort of seeking out opportunities to speak to people. So I think that's given us an amazing learning experience ourselves. But what's exciting about that is every single one of these young people, and there was quite a number of them, have all lent on us for references. And gone on to some other further vocation, whether it was education or other roles. And this particular young woman has secured her dream job supporting homeless people with mental health issues. Now, I should point out that every one of these roles is remunerated, and I think that's important in this space. And then lastly, the Young Provocateur. Now, typically in a co-design process, you will find a provocateur is a person who's, you know, curious and a critical thinker, but who actually sits outside the issue. So they're not lived experience, and they're not actually the professional. And they help sort of bring different perspectives and challenge perspectives and sort of helpfully ask naive questions and can come and sit in across the design process or the research process and interject energy and challenge. And so that would look like typically, you know, whether we were talking about GPs around mental health challenges, inviting someone in from the outside in terms of, say, a cafe owner and asking them to come in and talk about hospitality, or someone who runs a sports club coming in to talk about how do they build community. But actually this young lady here, Adonna, was a bit different. So she was actually from the previous project, and she really exemplified these amazing skills and this real genuine curiosity. And she had really built up her capability from the previous work. And so we worked with her to have an opportunity to come in on a short casual role in a project that we were designing internal policy in the Department of Education here in New South Wales. And so what she was able to do was she came in to that role with a particular sort of administrative type of role. So she was our scribe in a lot of our workshops in those sessions. And we had pre and post sessions every time before we met with our partners. And we really looked to scaffold her understanding of what might happen in that workshop, what we're aiming to work through in that workshop, and really debriefing. And what we did in that space was we really named her role intentionally to ensure that there was real clarity and that, you know, authentic challenge, and she felt safe to do that. But also it meant that she could step back into that administrative role when she wanted to as well. And this really required us to be her allies and really invest in the coaching on her behalf, and really treat her as one of the team and ensure that she felt that she had the clarity of role and the safety to speak up. And it was amazing to actually watch her challenge some fairly sticky institutional moments, and actually got the team reflecting on the power that they held and the responsibility that they held to use it effectively. So on the last thing, I just wanted to really sort of say that, creating these authentic participatory processes, are these learning journeys, like Mike said, and they're more than a workshop. It's right from supporting someone to find the voice, to be able to voice that, and to feel that they do wish to participate and they do have the value to participate. And how do you concurrently build those conditions in and around your service users to feel that they can do that if they wish to voice their needs and their views, right through to the evaluation process with a clear scope and a genuine commitment from ourselves to follow through and to open ourselves up to curiosity. So it's about how you plan, how you signal, how you communicate, the language you use, the space you really hold with care and without judgment and without bias. And I think every interaction, every moment that you have working with these people needs to show that these people are of value, that the experiences they bring is genuine expertise. And I think it really is an opportunity to help break down inequity in a system by shifting the culture from inside our organisations. And so I'm leaving with a few questions to ask yourselves in these opportunities to include people with lived experience in your service design processes about, am I creating a purposeful and respectful way for people to participate? Am I actively listening and really valuing the wisdom that people are sharing? Am I creating the right conditions for people to feel supported and appreciated and welcome and just show up as they wish? They might show up one day very differently to the other, and that's okay. Am I behaving in a way that's reinforcing power dynamics or inequity, or am I actually opening and creating a space and holding a space that's safe for change? And am I seeking and validating consent early and often throughout that process with them? Am I intentionally going into this process the whole way through in terms of building long relationships, not a one-off interaction with someone, but genuine long-term relationships that only leaves good behind? And are we acting in a way that's going to allow positive opportunities to emerge beyond that sort of life of that project? So I hope this helps you and think about how you really create that authentic experience and how you create those conditions to support people to really bring their lived experience into the support that you're creating. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that. The questions are so useful as well. We can maybe, we'll figure out a way of sharing them with participants afterwards as well as the slides. That'd be great.
Yeah. Beth's got the link. She can pop it in. Thanks, Beth.
Amazing. Any questions for Melanie? Does anyone want to jump in? This is where I have to scroll through 4 screens of Zoom to find that there's someone on the 4th screen with their hand up. This is,
I'd like to ask a question.
Go for it,
Ryan.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it's to do with the bit you're saying about looking at the power dynamics and, am I committed to this? And I think part of my issue sometimes in the way sometimes this is delivered is that a lot of statutory sector staff go to the favoured few in the way they either consult with and then call it co-design, co-production, or anything else that they want to do at the same time. How do you begin to, or how would you suggest that from an outside perspective, you start challenging that? Because it is making life more difficult for them, because it's easy to phone up the 10 people they've always phoned up, rather than another 20 of potentially stroppy people that they don't like or don't understand or whatever.
That is a good
and don't really want there. but
Yeah.
really have intense and deep community knowledge and understanding?
Look, I've definitely been in this situation myself, and seen it happen. I think it is about creating those concurrent processes in your organization, and like I said, about, you know, how do you actually build the conditions around service users, or the opportunities around your service users to engage with yourselves and create that ability and invite people into your organization. And so it's going beyond picking up the phone to those 10 young people that always answer and they're really excited about interacting with you, and thinking about what's the little seeds that you can plant that signals that those people have value and that they have an opportunity to share their voice as well. And how is it that you can build slowly capability around those people? And the one thing I've seen previously was about service users then exiting a service because they were now sort of 25, 26, and the gap between that and maybe, you know, volunteering or going into other work. And so actually creating a program that built those young people's capability after they'd moved out of that service. And I think it's continually about finding small opportunities to continue to build relationships with people, and, you know, look, actively challenging the people that are in the organisation who are only speaking to those 10 people, because to be quite honest, it's a real risk to your organisation as well, because you get a very skewed view of what are people's needs and what are people's experiences. And I think also those community connector roles, I think, is a great opportunity to work outside the sort of normal networks. It's actually going through their networks. And I think in those instances, there's an opportunity for us to say, you know, are we actually even the right people to be speaking to these people? And, you know, look, I'm a designer. Often that's not the right person to speak to someone. And recognizing that and working in a way that is absolutely about putting those people first and their safety first and their needs first. And so if that means it's about supporting someone else to go out and talk to these people, then I think that's a way forward and an appropriate way forward.
Thanks, Melanie. Can I just quickly ask Mike or Stu or Sarah, do any of you have any thoughts on recruitment, or just any quick thoughts or piece of advice for people? I think it's a big issue that keeps coming up.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on what Melanie said, like, don't go to your usual expert group. So, you know, people have become like expert versions of themselves, like being able to understand the system. So, you know, really practically speaking, there are actually recruitment organizations out there. I can maybe share some links that specialize in finding people who are not commonly found, I guess, and involved in this kind of work. At the Home Office as well, we're working with them on a range of interesting services, but the director, Katie Arnold, there has an absolute kind of standardized list of different demographics and different types of people that we should be going to as a minimum, and that's quite helpful to have as well. Make sure your organization has something like that. You know, when we do kind of testing and stuff like at the Home Office, we make sure absolutely that people with disabilities are involved, so we make sure that our services are accessible. So just making sure you have a wide range of people involved. Who am I to define what that right range is? Nobody is, but to strive to do your best is what's most important, I think.
Thanks, Sarah.
And on striving to do your best, it's probably around questioning why you're doing it in the first place. Because like from Laurie's question earlier, it sounded like that organisation were almost wanting to validate ideas that they've already got by showing them to people and asking for nice feedback, which we see all too often. But the very point of bringing people into a process, inviting people in, inviting them to be true and honest and helpful in terms of what that idea should shape and become, is all about learning what it should be, testing your assumptions, being ready and willing to be wrong, and sort of doing the work to position yourself in that place as an organisation to be ready to hear the thing which you've maybe not wanting to hear. It's really difficult, but asks you to sort of be ready for that. So yeah, going back to why are you doing it in the first place?
Mike, any final thoughts on that one?
Just to repeat the point that Sarah made, you know, about broadening the demographic as much as possible and about trying to take some guidance. I just want to go back to the slide that Melanie showed, the am I questions. And can I suggest that everyone prints that off, puts it on their wall and reads it first thing every morning? Because that's one of the best, like that's up there with the One Team Gov 7 principles of how we should work. But actually those questions, you know, those self-critical questions. Am I doing the right thing here? Am I doing it for the right reasons? Am I having the right effect that I want to have? Those are really, really important questions. So thanks very much, Melanie, for sharing that.
Yeah, particularly like that. Yeah, I thought it was really useful. Yeah, and I think like from practical terms, like having a list of core questions like that, or kind of key principles. So we talked a lot about the kind of CAS better design principles. That can be much more useful as a team to adhere to that and think, right, we're going to go and deliver a 16-page strategy that you all need to read and understand that nobody will ever read or understand. So those types of questions can be really, really practical. Okay, so Kirsty, I'll hand over to you just now.
So on the note of practical terms, I'm going to be speaking a little bit about some tools and methods that we can put into practice to bring some of these activities to life a little bit more, to help engage folk, to help them feel like meaningful, active exercises as well. I've got some slides, so I'm going to work out how to show them. So I'm not an experienced Zoom user.
Share screen, the wee green weird arrow thing down the bottom should work, yeah.
And then do I need to select my own desktop?
Yeah, that should be the one.
Sorry that everybody's joining me in this journey.
I'm on this journey every time I use Zoom. I'm like a perpetual amateur, to be honest. So. Ellie's giving me a look because she knows that I've got to help her with a conference that's going to be entirely on Zoom in about 2 weeks' time. I'm not a perpetual amateur. I totally know what I'm doing.
Like custom preferences. Oh, this is horrible.
I can pop a link to your slides in the chat as well, Kirsty, if that's useful. Folk can bring them up for themselves.
Yeah, that would work.
Ahead of time.
Okay.
There we go. So Beth's put the
toolbox. Be viewable to everybody with that link. There's no.
Do you want me to share screen here and then you could talk through them? Would that be useful?
Yeah,
I can do that. Yeah.
Already, fantastic. Thank you. There's only a couple of slides, Ross, so I'll give you a nod when we're moving on. So, like we mentioned, there's been a lot of talk thus far from Mike and from Melanie. Thank you so much for your wonderful stories and extensions, and I feel like I'm continuously learning from you both. So I'm making notes as we go along. We wanted within this session to give a sort of practical element to it as well. A lot of the work that I do in and around public sector, I've found that I've been leaning quite heavily on my design skills of making things. I like to prototype, I like to bring ideas to life, and I like to use as readily available, as cheap and as childlike objects as possible to do that. So what I wanted to share today was just a couple of ways in which I've found doing that within co-design sessions helps massively with the mood in the room, the feelings of people's involvement, and also the methods of sort of continuous involvement after that particular moment. So here's a quick run through them. So on the next slide, before jumping into some of those methods, I just wanted to take a moment to sort of say, I know today's session is largely talking about sort of tokenism within co-design, and we've all been in rooms that maybe look a little bit like this one in the picture, where it's people sitting around a table, maybe engaged with pieces of paper, maybe engaged with something on a whiteboard or on a wall, but quite often that room can feel like people not engaged with things, not physically touching things, sitting with their arms folded, not touching the plate of biscuits, even if there is a plate of biscuits. And while we wanted to state that that moment within the design process is incredibly important, it's not the whole of the design process. So the tokenism sort of involved within co-design often comes from the fact that everything is focused on that room, whereas actually I think what we've heard a lot from Mike and from Melanie already is that involving that within your process and doing it well involves a lot of planning beforehand. So how to get people to that room, wherever that room might be, and how to involve them in terms of planning it. So what's going to work for them, what's going to feel like good involvement. It also involves everything that happens after that room. So how do you keep people involved with what has happened within the design process? How do they keep coming back and learning about what it is that you're developing, helping them test it, helping make it better? And quite often I find that the word tokenism comes up when people are only involved in this particular moment. And it's almost ticked off the list as a good thing to have done because it's a sort of jazzy buzzword. So some of the stuff that I've got in the next couple of slides helps in this room in particular, but also helps with the planning beforehand and the continuing to talk afterwards. So some practical examples. Next thing I love to do when it comes to moving from sort of purely talk and discussion and questions and opinions in a room is to start to draw stuff out. A lot of service designers that you'll come across working in public sector, working in charities, have come from art school backgrounds. That tends to be the career route thus far. Possibly shouldn't be the only career route, but that's maybe a different session or book or PhD. But being able to draw and being able to draw things quickly and being sort of rather having the confidence to draw things quickly, which does not involve an art school education, has been something which I lean upon very, very quickly, and I find it helps massively in those rooms. It helps to gain consensus of what is being talked about and shared. And I'm finding this increasingly at the moment as we're having more and more teleconferences and remote working, is that quite often those conversations you feel like you're all talking about the same thing, but it just takes one person to quickly draw out, this is an A4 sheet of paper, say, is it this, this and this? Show it to the rest of the people. If you get enough nods, you know that you're onto the right thing. If even one person is shaking their head, you're able to change it together. This again is something which is really cheap and really quick. You don't need particular equipment to be able to do it. I have a preference for using the felt tip pens that you can get at the end of the aisle in the supermarket. Maximum £3 expenditure for this one. Also, if you're working in new and different spaces, depending on when you're hosting your session with people, I tend to always try and clock where the printers are on my way in, because that's always a place where you can get more paper. So having the comfort to be able to draw things out quickly to gain consensus and quickly, cheaply be able to understand if you're on the right track as a group helps people feel involved. It helps them feel like they've contributed, that they've got a part of that. And even offering pen and paper to others to make their own mark and contribute their ideas to it is so easy, so quick, and so helpful for people as well. So that's idea number one. Second one, oh, the picture's a wee bit blurry. To continue the theme of childhood toys and stationery, for a lot of workshops and projects that I'm involved with, I carry my box of Lego. Lego is immensely helpful to mock up things that happen in physical spaces over time. So if you're talking about a service that people will experience in a particular place, or you're talking about making changes to a particular interior, say for example, in order for movement to happen, different stages of a service to happen, different roles to play out within a service, this can very much help people to understand that happening concurrently. It's also fantastic in the moments where people are disagreeing with stuff. So this picture is from a project I was running in Kyrgyzstan, and that's why it's in Russian. We'd had a first day of a workshop with a team who were not happy working together. There was lots of folded arms, there was lots of discussion, there was lots of sort of, here's our main idea, but we're arguing about the detail of it rather than fleshing out how it could be made possible. What I did was I came in early the next morning and laid out roughly what it was they were talking about, but I intentionally put a couple of things wrong in terms of how they were wanting to use this space to register vehicles in Kyrgyzstan. What that meant was when the team came in and started working on it, they were immediately moving things and immediately having conversations about how the thing could properly work. and having this sort of physical language to be able to communicate with help them all get onto a level playing field and all see the same thing together at the same time. It's very easy. There's a multitude of ways that it can transform into, but it's so kind of transformative in terms of how people engage with the sort of task in front of them and the activity that you've set them. So well worth digging out a childhood set if you've got one in a cupboard, borrowing from friends and family, and holding on to it when your nephew's born, because I'm not giving it up very soon. Nice. I've got a couple of other examples. I've borrowed this picture from Hertfordshire Council, but this is a method that we're using within social security at the moment. This is a sort of user research and testing method that's known as pens of power. So if you do a little bit of Googling on pens of power, you can probably find out some other examples of teams that have been using this. This is a lovely way of testing, in particular, content design. And we're producing lots of letters and messages and notifications at the moment that we're doing lots and lots of testing of how we write things, how transparent we can be within social security. But it has a multitude of uses for any service, any organisation who is producing content can make use of this this tool. Originally sort of designed to work on pen and paper. You can imagine a scenario where as a team you've been designing a particular outfit, a particular piece of content, you print it out, you bring it with you when you meet with your service users, and you also bring along 2 different colours of highlighters, and you give people the option to use both. They read through your content, narrating at the same time with the things that they're noticing, the things that they're finding of interest, positive and negative, and they're tasked with highlighting everything in green that they find helpful and understandable, and everything in red that is difficult to understand. So you come away with a bundle of paper that very clearly tells you the next iteration you need to make on your design, the changes, and you've got an explanation as to why that is. So not only have you got the sort of important learning of what have we got right and what do we still need to change, but the person has literally made their mark on your design. They've sort of incorporated their thinking, their opinions into that state of the prototype. This is also something that you can do online, we've been discovering. So the teams have always taken this out on paper, but we've discovered that if you are on any form of internet call, really, and you sent a Word doc file containing this information to the participant that you're testing with, to the citizen that you're speaking to. Apologies, I've got sirens outside here. If they share their screen showing the Word doc, they can go through and use the highlighter tool that's available on all Word doc functionalities. Save the file once you're finished and send it back to you, and you've got a digital version of it. And that way lots of people can observe at the same time. So there's a digital method of doing this tool as well. My last slide is another digital method. So the design teams in social security are living on Miro boards at the moment. I dream about them, which isn't great. But we're finding this to be a fab method of collaborating, and are also starting to use it for research and testing as well. So not is it only a space where sort of a project team can come together, but it's also something where you can create a particular viewpoint for someone that you want to invite in to ask their opinions on things. The functionality that's involved in it has a little bit of a learning curve in terms of where do I go, what can I click on, what if I change something, how do I zoom, but the sort of team producing these types of online collaboration tools have sort of designed them with layers so that you can sort of, if you want to, fully go in and sort of change all sorts of angles and colours and font choices and things like that. Or you can come in at quite a top level and comment on things, or point to stuff, or just, you know, move your cursor to say this bit doesn't feel quite right yet. So it's worthwhile investigating whether using online collaboration tools are worthwhile for your project teams to kind of come together and bring ideas together, but also whether they are useful things to then invite other people into or show at particular moments, and if so, at what level fits for the sort of method of involvement that is best for the user group that you're working with. So that's just a couple of very quick examples there of practical, useful, fairly cheap options to bring people in, not only bring people into the design process, but bring that design process to life a little bit more, things that people can hold on to, remember, and stay involved in. So that's all from me thus far. That's nice.
That was excellent. Thank you, Kirsty. It was really good to have that practical side of things. There's lots of questions coming through there. Beth, any that you picked out? I was too busy waiting for the next slide to go to notice them all. So.
Yeah, there's a couple of people asking about if there's kind of a case study for the Lego exercise you mentioned, Kirsty, and also how you might do that digitally if you're not able to get people together during our current circumstances.
That's a question I'm asking myself right now. There's a particular bit of the design I'm working on at the moment that I'm itching to do in Lego, and I need to transform it into a digital version of that, and I'm not quite sure how to. I have the same question. I'm wondering whether it's creating blocks on a screen and allowing people to kind of move them around, setting up a series of exercises or a series of scenarios and almost kind of asking people to move them as they see fit. Mm. I'm not quite sure whether there's a replica tool that would help for that.
Yeah, because someone had mentioned Minecraft, which was interesting.
But a bit like that, yeah.
I guess there's the kind of fairly steep learning curve for anyone over the age of 14, which might come with Minecraft, whereas we're all probably slightly au fait with Lego. I know Lego's got an online version that's a bit like Minecraft, but I mean, it's not going to have the same kind of tactile kind of thing to it, really. Has anyone done that out of interest? Anyone done anything more?
So we're in the early, hi, I'm Janine. We're in the early stage of just experimenting with Minecraft. We predominantly work with children and young people from as young as 8 up to 25. And what we've done in the early stages is just to help them build virtual community. So we haven't entered co-design processes yet, but it's about setting up the organisation with an account. We've just talked a lot about safeguarding issues and having our youth workers work in pairs and all of the things that go with an online gaming platform. But they love it, and they're building and they're creating, and it's all their ideas, and they're shaping their community, and they're forming a virtual community with kids, young people who are on the spectrum right through to young people. I'm in Northern Ireland, so it's, you know, people across communities and various across the whole region and things like that. So it's just watching them play at the moment, and I think that in and of itself is beautiful.
That's really cool. That's amazing. Like Sarah's just shown off now because they made an interactive room using virtual reality, which she said in brackets was a bit bonkers, which particularly that's amazing. Okay. There's some interesting stuff coming about interactive gaming platforms. I actually thought, like, Kirsty, I don't know, but I mean, like, we, for the senior leadership program we're on for SCVO, we use Lego quite a lot, and most like charity chief execs just like look at you like, I am not touching that Lego, and then as soon as like they get into the most competitive people in the world,
as soon as there's always that kind of like hesitant of like, what do you mean we're playing? And then as soon as people pretty much touch the first block or see another person moving it, they want in and involved in it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd considered sending out smaller packs in the post, so for participants doing that for sessions that they could keep, because I'll never get them back anyway. I just need to accept that. So, okay, there's lots of other tools for those of you who are interested coming through in the chat. So if you're looking at the chat, do go and have a look. So things like Google Jamboard, Mural, Miro are coming through there. Padlet's been mentioned as well. So go and have a look and explore those. Okay, right, I'm going to hand over to our final speaker, which is Sarah Drummond.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Let's just get this screen share working. Can you just give me a whoop if, oh, I'm giving it away. God, giving the answers away. There we go. Can you give me a whoop if you can see it and hear me okay? Great, thanks. Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Kirsty. Well, yeah, look, thanks so much for having me. I'm just going to set a little timer and try and keep myself on time because Ross knows I like a lot of slides because I like pictures. Just really, yeah, really great to be here. My presentation is pretty much yes and. So we had a little confab before this with Mike, Mel and Kirsty to make sure that we kind of tried to build each other. So apologies if some of it's repetitive, but yes and all that stuff, particularly in what Melanie was saying actually around looking after the people that you're working with. I'm going to not talk about any of that today, but just understand that it's implied in the work that we've done. So I'm going to start here. This is a picture of a book called Co-Design for the 1970s. It was a book that I accidentally found in the architectural bookshelf at the Glasgow School of Art when I studied there, about a group of kind of urban planners and designers who are experts in creating buildings and built environment structures and urban plans, about their approach to co-designing with communities before they created the kind of architectural plan. What I loved about kind of this book and what it helped me to understand that in many cases of delivering a product or service or a thing that you're trying to design, there is some form of expertise in the room, whether that expertise is about the people who are going to use that thing or the people that are going to help you build and deliver that thing. And on the left-hand side here is a little diagram. It's called Le Corbusier diagram. Le Corbusier was quite a famous architect who made lots of modular structures and modernist stuff in the 30s. But they used to map on the kind of sun rising to sun setting, like the different needs of the community, what they might be doing in that kind of space. And Stanley here actually is demonstrating how they would have these kind of open boards and people would come and colour them in and have a sense of ownership in actually designing that community structure with them. And in some sense, you could say that Stanley King and his group were the experts because they were the ones who actually, you needed them to actually build the thing that was going to be created. But there's lots of other examples out there of people creating a built environment around them by doing, you know, community co-ops and using kind of prefab structures to build their stuff. So there's always this question for me about who really is the expert in the room. I just included this, by the way, because this is like a diagram of how to run a co-design session. And you always need a man with a lute. On the left-hand side, this was genuinely their instructions and some food. So just always make sure you've got a lute. But for me, like really the kind of, I always think about co-designing as a spectrum. And the real question is where the power lies in setting the brief, the vision, and what expertise is actually needed to implement it. And so I always think about these two kind of variable constraints is what kind of active involvement do people have in the delivery of the outcome? And what kind of control do they have of the outcome and actually setting the original brief and vision? I'm going to show you a diagram. We'll show the slides. I'm not going to kind of pour over this, but this has just been a little bit of my thinking when I think about when we work with clients about what type of approach are we going to take and how much involvement you actually need from people to design a really good service, which is what we predominantly do at Snook. And actually lots of our work fits in this kind of first quadrant of doing user research and usability testing, where we have an expertise in taking needs and turning them into designs that can be used by hundreds of thousands of people, designing for people like Scottish Government or like the Home Office. But we've also done work that fits in the space of kind of more co-production, where we're gently facilitating a process for people to kind of use design tools and build the thing that they want to build and make it themselves and deliver it. You could even argue that things like data-led citizen science are a form of co-design. It's just the users unbeknownst that the app that you're using is providing data to build a better service. So co-design is a massive, massive spectrum. You know, as Kirsty showed, it looks a bit like this. Sometimes it can be a kind of workshop where we're using physical tools to explore a brief or design a new product or service. It can look like usability testing, where we're really down to kind of like the real detail of co-designing this kind of a new website with people, but kind of seeing if it works and doesn't work. It can be a kind of co-design platform. So if you've ever designed some very fluorescent Nike shoes, you know, it's a form of co-design with that brand. They're giving you a platform with constraints, but you still have a space to design within it. I know Ellie's on the call, which is great. And we did some work with Ellie actually years ago at Cargom, which is a fantastic charity around equipping frontline staff essentially with design tools to go out and co-design new brand principles and new brand statements and visuals with the people that they support. Or working kind of on the right hand side here is the kind of Tada Blue Peter, here's one we made earlier, but we designed Hackney Council's new business service, just like basically information and guidance on how to do different stuff like set up a market stall. And we worked with a group of about 10 businesses, so quite a small amount of people, and involved them kind of throughout in terms of sorting out information, designing the website, looking at the information architecture of that, does it make sense, testing it with them in pubs, designing and checking the content with them and ending up with this, and that's kind of a form of co-design. And into much more kind of wider spaces where we've done things like the Matter, which is a kind of program of about 12 weeks that teaches young people how to research, design and publish a newspaper in response to a question set by like a local authority. And arguably, I think, have a lot of power in actually setting the kind of content that they want to put forward and what they want that deliverable to look like, but again, within some constraints. Right to kind of Get Go Glasgow, which was essentially a community co-op that was set up that I was involved in like about 10 years ago, and providing, again, design tools, but for them to really lead the way in what the problems were that they actually wanted to solve and set the brief. So co-design really is a massive spectrum of different variables of how much people are involved and how much power they have in that situation. I've put this as a bit of a kind of a joke and out there comment, but I do end up in a lot of co-design workshopitis, which is a term I just made up yesterday, but kind of getting to this point where you sit in a room, you've got lots of post-its, there's pens, there's lots of conversation, and genuinely we tend to get the kind of same stuff that comes out. And going into a lot of co-design workshops around how to design a new service for most sectors, I've actually got a list of the similar things that I hear all the time and would like to do some data on that. But here's very similar things, like it needs to be easy to use, I want a service that listens to me, it should reach out to people. But the question when you're designing something is how will you do that? And so as Kirsty said, like prototyping is totally central to understanding how someone will use something. And as Mike said, it empowers people to bring services to life. So you can create tools which allow people to kind of build the future narrative and thing that they want to see. And you can, as an expert, if you're a designer who's used to designing scaled services, so if you're designing for scale, you can take that insight from that table and you can turn it into design. So it's not always, co-design isn't always about exactly saying, yes, that's what you said you want on the table. It's about understanding sometimes the needs. But there's a lot of inference in who the expert is in different processes. Very similar here, to give you kind of another example. We're currently redesigning some of the software that call handlers use when you call 999. This is a little example of it on the right-hand side. But on the left-hand side, we've actually got a kind of co-design group across the UK of police officers, call operatives, and we've been kind of paper prototyping with them at first, like what kind of questions they got when they call, what kind of things they need, and then actually testing the software on the right with them. And it's a form of co-design. We're kind of in the lead as experts, but they're the experts in the knowledge of what works and what doesn't. And so what I say to anybody when you're actually thinking about designing is using a hypothesis-driven approach. You can only really do that, I think, if you understand the people that you support, you understand the lived experience, and you've done that hard work first. But start with a vision, and it's a bit like blankety blank, saying that we believe that if we do this thing, it will result in this outcome because we know this. To find out if this is true, we will do this thing and we'll measure this thing. And it's a form of prototyping and testing. So design really is all about testing and learning what works. And I think that's a part of co-design really when you're working with people. And you can involve people as much or as little, as long as it's fitting for delivering on the outcomes and you respect that input, as Mel said earlier. All of this is about a genuine curiosity and a quest for how we can support people in the right way and meet their needs. So two really quick examples of organisations that I think have really started to embed test and learning into the kind of DNA of what they're doing. Samaritans are in the process of actually live piloting in a closed pilot web chat. And we helped them at the start of that process to work with people who have been users of Samaritan services and are now in a safe and stable place, to kind of co-design that at the outset using some of these tools that we were talking about, and just talk to them about the different types of functions and scenarios that they might be in, that they might have wanted to use this kind of service. And so we created some propositions, but we don't know if that's right or wrong, so it's all about an assumption and based on our research. And so what Samaritans did was take our kind of paper prototyping and basic prototypes and turn them into things that can actually be used. They've been doing that now for the last, I think, like year probably, but they're now piloting a real-time, what they call written word service. And what I love about it, when you read the blog about it, which I'm happy to share the link on, is the curiosity to the real detail of how you get that thing delivered by doing kind of co-design with people. How long is the average chat? What does our waiting time, look like, and what do we need to do? So they're really starting to embed sort of test and learn into what they're doing. Another organisation that I'll talk about them because I feel really proud of them and I'm a trustee there, is With You, and going on a journey to be like a data-led organisation, and that data being co-designed through their staff knowledge, through data that they're getting on how things are used, and from working and co-designing their services with people that they support. So they're called With You. If you don't recognise them, they used to be called Add Action. But even when we created a new brand only 6 months ago, I could tell you 2 years ago when I joined that the board would probably, like many charitable boards, argue about what the right thing was to do. But we actually got data by going out and working with people in the communities, with staff, and testing some of the ideas that were coming up with around the new brand, getting numerical data as well, so quantitative data, to kind of really inform us to make the right choice around what the name was and how it should look and feel. And so we've really been kind of positioning on that data stuff. And we've really tried to bring the staff with us on that journey, because I think, you know, there's a sentiment that people are most likely to be committed to carry something through if they have had a stake in the idea. And your staff are users too, and so we've really tried to bring them through the journey of this kind of brand redesign and service redesign that are going on, to really get them on board with what we're doing. It's particularly difficult if you work in a kind of federated organisation, or you have lots of geographic outposts, like maybe Scouts or Citizens Advice Bureau, that you bring them in that kind of co-design process. And another ways we've been doing this is testing and learning how to make appointment bookings more successful. We had a massive drop-off of more than 50% of people getting referrals into therapeutic services. And we just tested lots of different ways of reducing anxiety and the language we're using in that service and the way it was designed to get a kind of really good outcome. And that was co-designed by working with staff and with people in the centre. And lastly, to kind of trying to get, if you don't know what naloxone is, sorry, naloxone is a overdose reversal drug, which can be administered at the point of someone taking an overdose and ultimately saves lives. And we had a lot of people not taking this up, but we tried lots and designed lots of different ways to tweak, kind of quickly going through the instructions to use it to get more out the door and ultimately getting it into the hands of more people. And I would argue that that's kind of a co-design approach as well. So the big thing for me really about all of this is about embedding test and learn principles, you know, right from your board down to frontline staff. And really building that into your organisation, and just recognising that there is no purist co-design methodology or stage that you can follow. It's a real spectrum. You've always got to ask that question of where does the power lie in the room, in that project and in that process, and who should own it. So yeah, that's me. Sorry, that's a whistle-stop tour there.
That's brilliant, Sarah. Thank you. I don't know if you spotted in the chat, actually, we're going to have someone from with you on the DigiShift probably about 20th of September. So we're just trying to confirm that to talk about their online support groups. So that should be really interesting. And then hopefully covering some of the stuff that they've done in that kind of live chat space as well. So we deliberately, because of time, and Mike and Melanie are still here. I don't know what's happened, but I thought you had to run away, but you're here. You're addicted. You're staying for more. So we're going to, Kirsty and Sarah are both going to be able to take questions now. So I'm sure there's some have come through. Does anyone want to turn the video on and ask away if you've got anything to ask for Kirsty or Sarah? Jules, do you want to jump in? There we go.
Yeah, hi. I just want to say thank you to all the speakers today. It's been really useful. I've been scribbling notes. Sarah, I'm really keen to touch on this idea of power that you were talking about. I work for LGBT Health and Wellbeing, and I don't know if any other organisations face this issue, but often the needs of our community and the problems that they want to solve and the input they want to have can sometimes conflict with how we communicate with much less aware and less informed funders. So right down to, say, the name of our organisation. I was just thinking about the way that you've worked with other organisations there in terms of that co-design approach to involve them in a change of branding or a change of name, for example, like with our organisation. I can quite imagine that some of the things that would be coming out of that work, that co-design work, would clash a bit with some of the challenges we face in terms of getting funders to understand our work and who we're working with. We still sit around tables having to describe to people what LGBT means. So when the community is asking us, you know, why isn't the name expanded? Why isn't it a queer organisation? Why aren't you using these terms, these letters? In response to that, you know, behind the scenes, we often talk with each other about how it's hard enough to get people to understand just basic, the kind of original LGBT name. So there's a mismatch there with what our community's needing the organisation to do and how it's presenting itself with the people we need to go to, the powers that be, to help fund the work. So I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, Jules, that's like, oh my God, it's like the $1 million question. I get asked this in pitches actually a lot for our work, to be honest. Like, so a lot of organisations deliver stuff that they get funded to do, and many of you probably recognise in the charitable world that we end up on a funding hamster wheel. So we end up actually going quite far away from either what we originally set out to do, and that's definitely kind of read a lot of literature about that, or B, as needs change, don't actually meet the needs of the communities we originally set out, the beneficiaries as we would call them in a very kind of professional language, set out to do. So, I mean, I don't want to spoil the With You talk that's coming up, so I don't know exactly who it is or what they're going to talk about, but I would really say that one of the things we've done is, and I've done it with other organisations as well, is first of all, do some research around what those needs are and bring that research to life. Now, the best way you can bring that to life is by putting the people who have that lived experience in front of the people who make those decisions. That's number one. If that's not possible, which isn't always possible for a multitude of different reasons, is to do your best job in representing that story. And I say best, that's a whole other talk, and there's lots of ways, and probably Mel I'd point out to give more insight into that, but do your best job to represent the insights of what those people need. And bring that back to your boards, bring it back to your executive team and your senior team to really ask the question of, are we really meeting these needs? With You, we are doing quite a bit of that at the moment, because our ambition, our strategy is to help 10 times more people. So when we've been addiction, and ultimately, let's be really blunt, addiction, like we predominantly dealt with people who have alcohol and drug substance abuse issues, and to the point of people being what we would refer to in common popular language as addicts, right? But a lot of people have addictions in lots of different things, like gambling. You might drink a bottle of wine a night, maybe two. It doesn't feel like an addiction, but you know, it's a crutch. So we've been trying to actually go out and do the research on who are all these other people that we don't even support that need our help. And so I'd start there. I think that your question is huge, so I'll probably pause there, but start there with actually presenting what the actual needs are of the people that you're there to aim at supporting.
Thanks.
My children have just walked in. They're trying to whisper and failing miserably at whispering. So this is okay. They've now taken cakes. I'm out with the ability to stop them taking cakes. This is going well. Okay. Okie doke. Right. Beth, save me here. Did you see any interesting questions in the chat?
Yeah, there's a couple of one good one. I don't know who wants to take this. So, somebody from an organisation that's stuck in the 1980s. How do they even start with this stuff when it's when they feel like they're at the very, very beginning of the journey, I guess. I don't know. Joe, do you want to say anything? It was your question. Is Joe there?
I am, but it's way past midnight here in Australia. So yes, I am in bed. But I work in a public dental organisation, and I'm just interested in if any of the speakers believe that you could skip ahead to co-design if you barely know consulting.
Okay, who wants to pick that up? Kirsty, do you want to pick that one up?
I can get us started. I think the most important thing to feel ready to be doing within this space is to know the ethics involved in involving people in the work, or essentially inviting people in. So if that's an area which needs a bit of research or a bit of practice or a bit of reaching out for another person to help you with, I think that's the first step, really. I quite like how you phrased it in terms of like skipping ahead to the design, because I often think back to the principles within government digital service here in the UK, and the first one says start with user needs. And I always think a lot about the way that that's phrased in terms of starting with user needs. Quite a lot of the areas that we all work in, that we're involved in, the organisations we're involved in, is that we know quite a lot of the needs of our users to begin with. We've got an idea as to what their lives are like. We don't know exactly, which is why we involve them, but we've got something to get started with. And quite often some of the ways of getting started with is presenting some of your ideas back to those people, and doing that as sort of like a method of consultation, of involvement. It's almost kind of going back and saying, we're thinking kind of this, how do we make it better? What could we add? What else don't we know about your lives that would help add to this? So those are also sort of methods of getting started that could perhaps jumpstart to that stage.
Can I come in with a really political one? We're not political, just like a kind of beat the legal batting around the head. So my side hustle, I have another job, which is I'm a CDO for a big 1980s-esque technology company, which is some similarities in a sense, Joe. What I did going in, because literally there was no co-design, no testing, no user research, no nothing really to actually design products and services from the perspective of people at the heart of them. And so I just threatened them, sorry, it's really blunt, I threatened them with the accessibility new regulations that have come out. Now I'm not sure what the Australian version is, so apologies if they don't exist, and I hope they exist at some point soon if they don't, but in the UK, we've got new public sector facing website kind of guidelines to make sure that by September the 23rd, our sites are accessible. And I've used that as a Trojan horse ultimately to get them to start actually going out and testing stuff and working with users. So if you want a really practical, like legal baton to hit people over the head with, that's actually a good one. And then if not, there's always the Equalities Act 2010, which is another, thing to scare people with. And if you just call it a risk with a capital R on it and rate it red, I found actually that that's a really good way, because if you want to make stuff accessible, you have to go and work with people, you have to understand them, you have to go and test it. So that's a really legal way to do it. I'm not saying that works in every case, but it's quite nice. Everyone hates a risk, so you got to do something about it.
That's great advice. So we had the head of UX in the BBC in one of our DigiShift calls, and he was talking about this, the simple way of framing this, that when you don't want to do accessibility, whatever that means to your organisations, like who are you choosing to exclude, and getting a board to take a deliberate decision, right, who are we excluding this week, or who are we excluding through this service that we're about to launch? Nobody wants to do that. So trying just that simple thing, like as Sarah said, just flipping the way that you frame it can sometimes make a big difference, and the penny drops for a lot of people. The only other thing I would add in is I think we need more service designers on charity boards, and this is something that we've been trying to do, and like SCBO have been involved in as well, about trying to get more digital people on boards. But it tends to be, either tends to be marketing and comms people, or it tends to be IT infrastructure people, and actually we need a much broader range of people who fall into that digital camp sitting on boards to really drive this stuff forward. Okay. Jean is asking if there is one small area you could start and get permission to try out so you can show the value or not. Was that a question, Jean, or a statement? I read it as a question and realised it might have been a statement.
No, sorry, it was an idea for Joe, was maybe could you get one tiny area that's going to be small to do as a experimental corner.
Yep, brilliant. Okay. Ted, you adopt a 3-meeting rule before any true dialogue takes place. Do you want to tell us about that very quickly?
I used to work, when I worked in the statutory sector, we were moved into a part of the city which has had no consultation for years and years and years. And the 3-meeting rule was the first meeting that you turn up at, that you just get shouted at, because you're the first statutory sector officer that's probably turned up and started listening. You take some activity, you take some of the notes on board, and you start doing some of that. The second meeting, you get shouted at, but you get less shouted at because you've actually done some of the actions from the first meeting, and you've been talking to people in between about some of those actions, and you've done that. And then by the time you take actions away from that one and you turn up at the third meeting, you start the dialogue. But it does take those 3 meetings, and as uncomfortable as it is, it worked. And we went and worked on outer ring council estates that had, besides a housing officer or something like that hadn't seen either any external funding or whatever it is for generations. And we ended up with community organisations that began to run services there, and we actually managed to persuade the council at this period of time, this is going back in the 90s, to delegate something like about £75,000 worth of grant funding to a community committee to actually decide and run the process themselves. They still had to have the governance and the contracts with the city council, but it was local people sitting there making that decision. But it did take a number of meetings to getting shouted at and moving forward.
Oh, brilliant. Good advice. Be prepared to be shouted at initially. That is always good advice. Okay. There's a question came in from Ellie. So Ellie was interested in service design skills and where you start and how you develop them. Lou Down's book, Good Services, mentioned. I usually have a copy to show people on calls. On every call, I have lost it, which is quite upsetting. So I don't know where it is. I Don't know what I've done with it. That's quite upsetting. I would echo that. It's an amazing book. Melanie, Kirsty, oh, there's a copy. There we go, in all its splendour. Melanie or Kirsty, any book recommendations or other starting points in terms of embedding skills?
I've just popped one into the chat in reference to what Ted was just talking about. Hilary Cottam, whose name I always spell probably wrong, is worth a good Google, wrote a book called Radical Help a number of years ago, but it describes community involvement projects and about not just the methods that were involved in the ways that the team sort of embedded themselves, not just necessarily embedded themselves, but sort of embedded design methods into how the community was starting to heal itself and develop itself. But more specifically talks about the time involved in doing that and about building trust and building relationships involved within that work. So that's a wonderful.
Brilliant, that's really useful. Melanie, I feel bad asking you, Melanie, because you probably need your bed now, but like any other?
I feel like I may have lost my ability to speak now. I think they were both excellent suggestions. There's lots out there.
Yeah, there's lots out
there.
Yeah.
Head across to the This Is HCD podcast as well, of course. I better put a plug in for those.
Yeah. And I think start small. So it's maybe starting thinking about like what does co-design look like in your organisation at the moment? Where are the bits that feel tokenistic, and where might you switch that out? So some of the stuff we're talking about is big cultural change, or even something that feels simple, like getting the right person on the board. That might be quite a bit of time off, but it might be time to ditch that awful survey monkey that only 3 people fill out, and maybe think about, is there a better way of doing things? So from today, it's not just adding on yet another thing to that toolkit, but what's the thing you might remove, and what might you start doing differently based upon that? Okay, we've probably got time for maybe 1 or 2 other questions. Anyone else want to jump in? It's getting to that late afternoon time. I scrolled through the videos and then realised that like most people have got their videos off, so we're coming to the definite end of the call. Beth, I don't know if you've got any final thoughts.
There's been some other stuff in the chat about, how you pay people, how you don't just make it feel tokenistic, but I think there was quite a lot of that in the chat that got a response. Someone had popped something about, is it time to get more community people involved in the service design teams in the public sector? So there was that kind of need to get service design people there now. Do we need to get community people there as well? But yeah, I think as you said, Ross, I think that's probably coming to one of the big takeaways for me is that idea about it's a long-term relationship that you're trying to build with people, that I think has come out from quite a lot of the speakers. There's maybe a useful way for people to think about if you're currently doing very light touch stuff. Actually, if you reframe your thinking, this is about the start of a relationship with somebody that you're going to keep involved as you work together. That's quite a useful point to take away as well.
Sorry, I was just going to mention I was a nurse when I looked at service design, and I went to college and I was managing a out-of-hours district nursing service at the time. And just by going to college and thinking about it, I started off by implementing very basic user tools that we've been discussing now into my first thought was around basic life support. I was a basic life support trainer and started there, just a small project, and it actually changed. And then what it did was it gave me the confidence to try more. So if you've got little, I don't know if that's helpful, but if you've got small projects that you're really confident in, that you think to yourself, I know this well, but what don't I know? What's this going to give me? What's this going to enable me with? It was worth a try, and it really encouraged me to keep going with, more and more. So I don't know if that helps any of you that are out there thinking, where do I start?
That's brilliant advice. That's really good advice. Yeah, I can't echo that enough. And you might want to start, when we're talking about starting small, it might be something external facing, but it might equally be something internal facing. So if there's a real risk aversion in your organisation, is there a pain point for staff? And maybe that's the start where you experiment with different service design methodologies and you get confident at it and you convince a senior management team of your board, and then it becomes something you do to those external facing services. The bit that I think you should all start with is holidays and toil. I've never worked anywhere where holidays and toil doesn't involve 7 gatekeepers and 8 forms. Go and just change holidays and toil. All of your colleagues will love you. So start with something small. That's really good advice, Moira. Thank you. Really good advice. Okay. Sarah's made a final point there about, I don't know why I'm reading it out. You're still on the call. You can just say it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to waver because I feel like what Moira just said was like the ending of the call, and I should have left it there.
I know,
but I was
should have shut up as well. I know, it was really good.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to make a quick point, which I didn't really make earlier, is that just remember that design is wider than just service design as a discipline. So design is that service design is both an expertise of people who are really, really good, I think as Moira just said, at knowing what works and what doesn't work in services because they've maybe worked on loads of them. It's like a good car mechanic, right? You can diagnose what's right or wrong with the car. But service design is also a verb where we're all service designing because all of us are making design decisions all the time, whether it's policy, whether it's like the financial decision of how you like finance a service, whether it's the business model. They're all design decisions that affect what the user or person experiences. But to make that reality, it is worthwhile having a look at and engaging with other forms of design expertise, whether it's good graphic designers or good interaction designers that make stuff work on the screen, and that design goes beyond the articulation and steps of the service model. It's into the actual execution of that, and that really does need really great expertise, and anyone can do that and train in it, but it's good to get someone who's good at it. So I just wanted to make sure that that's known because it's often missed a lot in service design kind of dialogue, and I think it's it's an important thing to look for those people too.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. That was really useful, Sarah. Okay, I am going to finish up there. Just letting everyone know, some of you came in late, so some of you missed Mike's session to start. The full video goes on the SCVO YouTube channel, so they go up fairly quickly on there. The other thing which I've put in the chat, I can put back in, is the DigiShift events coming up, so you can sign up for those. They're all free. The other thing we have, thanks to support from the Catalyst and SCVO and RS McDonald and the Health and Social Care Alliance, is Curve training, which I've just put in. So we're doing free training twice a week for charities. If you work at a charity, community group, or a social enterprise, you can attend those. The next one, there's one tomorrow actually, on optimising online safeguarding policies and practice. Maddie, who Beth works, is doing one next week on lean and agile working. And then the one after that is an introduction to on-page SEO. So we've got some really specific free sessions coming up. So you can go and sign up for those. Sarah's just put our slides link in there as well. Thank you very much for attending. And thanks to our speakers. So Mike, Melanie, Kirsty and Sarah, thank you.